Hello Art 2 students. So in this video I'm just going to show you how to finish off your tissue, your wet on dry, and your lifting techniques. And I'm also going to just combine a couple of techniques in this last square. So first, to start out, we're going to talk about the lifting. And for that, all you really need at this point is water, a paintbrush, and a paper towel. Because then what you're going to do is once that is completely dry, you'll go into that area, get your paintbrush pretty wet, and then you'll just put water directly onto that color, and you can already see the color starting to lift a little bit there. The harder you scrub and the more you go along one edge, the lighter that area in particular will be. Then all you have to do is go in with a paper towel, dab that up, and then your color is instantly lighter there. So as I was mentioning before, this can be a very helpful technique if you are making clouds or doing some sort of shading that's kind of like bushes or trees or something to where you have layers of lighter space overlapping darker spaces. So I'm just going to do a little bit more up here. And I could absolutely just wipe off my brush and continue lifting it with the brush if I don't want to make it quite as broad as the paper towel would. That does work as well. And that's more helpful for if you were doing water or something like that. But I'm going to zoom in here because now you can see that those lighter areas have been lifted so they look like they're coming off of the page a little bit more. Now I'm just going to move down and show you the wet on dry, because now what we're going to be doing, that should actually be, no, wet on dry, yeah. Because this one is dry, and now we're going to get another color, and we're going to go over that space with another color and see how those colors overlap. So I'm going to actually just use some yellow. I know you can't see my entire palette here, but I'm just getting my yellow saturated and wet so I can actually use it. And then I'm just going to go directly into the shape. I can do a circle, I can do some other shape, I could draw something first. But essentially I'm just going to put a circle here. And you can see that the area where they overlap is a different color. This section is yellow and this section is pink. So you'll just see that wherever that second color goes over the previously dried color, there would be a third color created. There might be a little bit of bleeding along the edge, but that's not an issue at all. So once this dries, I'm actually going to do one more smaller shape here so that we can see another color overlapping the yellow. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and just show you the tissue paper technique. So let me go grab a piece of tissue paper. Now, if you remember the last time, I just painted the yellow and the green on this section and let it dry. So now what I'm going to do is go back in with the blue on top of that, simply because I know that those three colors will mix and overlap and not create a brown. And what I'm going to do is get my brush pretty good and wet. I'm going to use a bigger brush. And I'm just going to paint directly over that space here. I'm going to make my square a little smaller than the one under it, just so that we can see sort of where the color was before and where it is now. And then while that is still wet, I'm just going to wad up some tissue paper, crumple it up so that it's kind of textured, and I'm just going to stick it on there, pressing it in, and then just letting it sit. Wad up a little bit more for the other side. And again, just stick that on there and let it sit. You don't want to move that while it's absorbing some of that color, but you do want to make sure that you move it before the whole tissue paper dries and sticks to the page. So now on this square down here, what I'm going to go ahead and start on is a combination of a couple different techniques. So I'm going to first just put some water on my page. And yes, my water is a little bit blue, but that's okay for this part. And then I'm just going to get one of my colors good and wet. I think I'll use some pink. I'm just going to drip some of that into the water. Maybe put a little blue down here. Put a little more water so that it spreads more. So this is, right now, a wet on wet. Because I'm taking wet pigment and putting it into the wet water. So I'm going to put a little more water here, just let that drip on there. Then I'm going to move my page around, let the water kind of move. And you'll see that as the page starts to dry, the water does move a little bit less. Adding more water will help it move around more to some extent, but you don't want to add so much water that it all just kind of runs into nothing. So now I'm going to sprinkle some salt on there. Sprinkle just a little salt here. Mostly around that outer edge where it's really dense. And then I'm actually also going to drip a little bit of alcohol on there. So I'm going to take the lid off of my alcohol, stick the whole brush down in the container, and then just let it drip onto the spot where I did not put as much salt. Okay, so then I'm going to let that dry and then scratch the salt off. In the meantime, I'm going to check to see if my yellow is dry here. Not quite. And I do want to let the tissue sit on here for another minute or two, and then I would go ahead and take that off. Almost dry enough. So since we do have a little time to play, I'm going to do another circle with the marker technique to show you how they would overlap once they are already dry. And I'm going to just go over and make a circle with my green that kind of overlaps all of those other circles. And then I'm just going to go in with the brush that's got some water on it. And my water is a little bit blue, but that's okay. And you'll see that the old marker from the previous circles does pick up a little bit and blend in there too. So that's just kind of a fun technique that has all the markers. You can create really interesting abstract pieces by doing series of marker circles that overlap more or less depending on the layer. You can alternate the sizes of them, different things like that. So now I'm going to go ahead and do another shape on top of my yellow here. It's not quite 100% dry, but it's close enough at this point. Gonna blow some of the salt off of that section. And I'm just gonna do a little triangle here. Make the triangle a bit bigger to spread the color out more. So on that one, because I did make the blue a bit darker than I intended, I'm just going to lift a little bit of that up by sticking a paper towel in it while that blue is still wet. And now that the blue pigment is kind of decreasing a little bit, you can see where the yellow and the blue mix. You can also, at this point, take a flat paper towel if you want to lighten that whole triangle and just press it down and lift it up. And it will make that whole triangle a lot lighter. It will give it a little bit of a texture, which is perfectly acceptable and usable as a technique if you would like. Just gonna mop up some of the spill that happened here when I turned the page. And now this section here with the tissue paper is ready for us to go ahead and take that off. And there is an example of the tissue paper technique, which is sometimes very subtle. That's why I will put sort of a base coat under it and then go over with the second layer to use the tissue paper, because I have gotten better results that way. I've gotten more depth and more texture and just more detail in general. So now, other than labeling this one, I've got all 12 of these techniques finished. I would obviously be waiting for this paint to dry so I could scratch the salt off that I have up here in the corners. I could add more salt, I could add more alcohol, because that paint is still wet. But right now I'm just going to let it dry, and then we'll scratch the salt off. Hopefully it's dry enough before you come to class later on, and you'll be able to see that one completed as well. So in this video, again, we finished up with the wet on dry, the lifting, the tissue. I added another circle, and then we combined wet on wet, salt, and alcohol.